In the volatile and high-stakes arena of American foreign policy, there are moments that define not just an administration but an era. Moments when the decisions made in Washington reverberate across continents, when the price of oil at a gas station in rural Ohio is directly connected to the flight of a ballistic missile over the Indian Ocean, when the fate of American troops stationed thousands of miles from home hangs in the balance of a diplomatic conversation being relayed through intermediaries in neutral capitals. This is one of those moments, nearly 4 weeks into a military conflict unlike anything the United States has seen in decades. A conflict that has seen more than 9,000 American airstrikes against Iranian targets. A conflict that has driven oil prices to nearly $100 a barrel and pushed American families to pay nearly $4 for a gallon of gasoline. A new and extraordinary development has emerged. President Donald Trump is declaring that the United States and Iran are talking, not through back channels and vague signals, through senior officials at the highest levels of both governments. And Iran, a regime that for 47 years has built its identity around defiance of American power, has reportedly given the United States what the president himself is calling a very significant gift. A prize, he says, worth a tremendous amount of money, related to oil, related to the Strait of Hormuz, and delivered, the president insists, by the right people on the Iranian side. What does that mean? Who are those people? What is the gift? And what does it tell us about where this conflict is headed? In the next 25 minutes, we are going to take you through every dimension of this story: the military picture on the ground, in the air, and at sea; the diplomatic maneuvering happening across multiple capitals simultaneously; the economic stakes that are rattling markets from New York to Tokyo; the strategic calculations of America's Gulf Arab partners; and the fundamental question that retired generals, former ambassadors, and senior analysts are all wrestling with tonight: can Iran actually be trusted to make and keep a deal? This is Special Report. Here is what we know tonight. President Trump, speaking Monday afternoon in Memphis, Tennessee, announced that he is extending his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously pausing threatened American strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure. The president confirmed that Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are actively engaged in negotiations with Iranian leaders. He said, and this is a direct quotation, that Iran is talking to the United States and, in his words, talking sense. He further confirmed that the central non-negotiable American demand remains unchanged. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. At the same time, in a development that adds layers of complexity to the diplomatic picture, Iran's parliament speaker publicly denied that any talks with the United States are taking place at all, calling reports of negotiations fake news and vowing what he described as complete victory in the conflict. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, the posture remains unambiguous. Defense officials confirmed they are continuing to strike Iranian military targets and intend to maintain that pressure until, in their words, this fight is finished. The gap between those two pictures, a president announcing talks and a gift, and a Pentagon maintaining its combat tempo, is not a contradiction. It is leverage. And understanding that dynamic is essential to understanding everything else happening right now. To fully grasp the significance of where we stand today, it is necessary to walk through what has unfolded over the past 4 weeks with precision and context. Operation Epic Fury, as the American military campaign against Iran has been officially designated, has now produced more than 9,000 confirmed strikes against Iranian targets. Those targets have included missile production complexes, command and control infrastructure, underground bunkers, radar installations, leadership compounds, and maritime assets. The campaign has been executed by an extraordinary array of American air power: F-18 Super Hornets and F-35 stealth fighters launching day and night from the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln; EA-18 Growler electronic warfare aircraft equipped with jamming pods designed to blind Iranian air defenses; B-52 strategic bombers operating from RAF Fairford in Britain, each carrying a full complement of 24 2,000-pound satellite-guided penetrator bombs capable of reaching hardened underground targets; British forces have been actively engaged alongside their American allies, shooting down 14 drones over Iraq in a single recent engagement, and in the skies over the broader region, A-10 Warthog ground attack aircraft have been targeting Iranian-backed proxy forces in Mosul, Iraq. The operational tempo has been sustained and relentless. The stated objectives from the outset have included destroying Iran's ballistic missile arsenal and production capability, eliminating the threat Iran poses to regional shipping and the global energy supply, and forcing a resolution of the nuclear question that has haunted American foreign policy for nearly 5 decades. Iran has not been passive in the face of this campaign. Iranian forces, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have launched sustained retaliatory strikes across the broader region. Those strikes have targeted Gulf Arab nations, including Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Energy infrastructure has been a specific focus of Iranian targeting, including a confirmed attack on an oil refinery in Kuwait within the past week. And in a development that has genuinely alarmed defense analysts and reshaped the strategic conversation, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia, the joint American and British military installation in the Indian Ocean, located approximately 2,500 miles from Iranian territory. Neither missile struck the installation, but the significance of the attempt goes far beyond the immediate result. It was Iran's first operational use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles in a live combat scenario. Defense analysts note with particular concern that the demonstrated range of those missiles means European capitals, including Paris and London, now sit within potential striking distance of Iranian ballistic capability. Just over 2 weeks before the Diego Garcia strike, Iran's foreign minister had publicly claimed that his country had intentionally limited its missiles to a range below 2,000 kilometers precisely to avoid being perceived as a threat to Europe. That claim has now been operationally contradicted by Iran's own military actions. Iran has also closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes. Dozens of tankers are backed up, unable to transit. The strait closure is the single most consequential economic weapon Iran has deployed in this conflict, and it is the direct cause of the energy market volatility that is being felt by American consumers at gas stations across the country. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the heart of this entire conflict in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Geographically, it is a narrow passage between the Iranian coast and the Arabian Peninsula, at its narrowest point approximately 21 miles wide. Through that narrow corridor passes the oil and liquefied natural gas that powers the economies of Japan, South Korea, China, India, and much of Europe. Japan sources approximately 73% of its energy needs through the strait. The economic interdependence that flows through that 21-mile passage is not merely significant, it is foundational to the functioning of the global economy. Iran's ability to threaten and effectively close the strait has given Tehran a form of economic leverage over not just the United States and its regional allies, but over every major industrial economy on Earth. Russia and China, despite their geopolitical alignment with Iran in various contexts, are not immune to the consequences of a prolonged strait closure. Every nation with significant energy needs has a stake in the strait reopening. Several specific geographic features of the strait region have taken on outsized significance in the current conflict and are central to the military and diplomatic maneuvering now underway. Karg Island is a 5-mile strip of land in the Persian Gulf that holds Iran's single most important oil export facility, a terminal that handles approximately 90% of the country's crude oil exports. Control of Karg Island is effectively control of Iran's economic lifeline. The Trump administration has been actively considering an operation to seize the island, and military planners are reported to be weighing the risks and logistics of such a mission. Those risks are substantial. Any naval force moving to seize Karg Island would be required to transit the Strait of Hormuz and travel well up into the Persian Gulf, operating throughout that journey within range of Iranian missiles and drones. The decision about whether to undertake that operation remains one of the most consequential choices before American military commanders. Additionally, 3 islands at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Tunb, are controlled by Iran but claimed by the United Arab Emirates. These islands, positioned strategically at the choke point where the strait meets the broader waters of the Gulf of Oman, have been a source of ongoing dispute between Iran and the UAE for decades. Their strategic value in the current conflict is self-evident. Control of those islands is effectively control of the physical gateway through which global energy supplies must pass. American military analysts have noted that Larak Island, positioned just south of Hormuz Island, has been used by Iranian forces to effectively toll or tax shipping passing through the strait. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, speaking on Fox News, suggested that eliminating Iranian military equipment on Larak Island could be a more achievable objective than seizing Karg Island, given Larak's distance from the Iranian mainland and the logistical challenges of projecting force deeper into the Persian Gulf. The military deployment picture reinforces just how seriously the Pentagon is treating the potential for ground operations. Marines from a unit based in Japan are expected to arrive in the theater within the coming 48 hours. Military analysts have described those Marines as well suited for a non-combatant evacuation operation if American embassies or citizens in the region face imminent threat. But the deployment conversation extends well beyond a contingency evacuation force. Fox News has confirmed that the 82nd Airborne Division, one of America's premier rapid deployment ground combat units, has been given prepared to deploy orders. The commander of the 82nd Airborne and members of its headquarters staff have been ordered to deploy to the Middle East. Senior military officials are actively weighing a possible deployment of a combat brigade from the division to support American military operations in the region. Additional C-17 transport aircraft have departed the United States carrying paratroopers and what analysts believe to be special operations forces bound for the theater. The American military footprint in the Middle East is expanding significantly, even as diplomatic conversations are underway. The diplomatic dimension of this story is simultaneously the most hopeful and the most uncertain element of what is unfolding. The United States has transmitted to Iran a 15-point peace plan. Much of the plan addresses the nuclear question, specifically the American demand that Iran not enrich uranium on its own territory and that it dismantle much of its nuclear enrichment infrastructure. The plan also addresses Iran's support for proxy forces throughout the region. Israeli media has reported the details of the plan, though the Trump administration has not formally confirmed them. What the president has confirmed is that the United States believes it is now talking to the right people on the Iranian side, and that those people have demonstrated their seriousness by delivering a gift related to oil and the flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. The president declined to specify the nature of the gift at this stage of the negotiations, but was unambiguous that it was significant and that it demonstrated credibility on the Iranian side. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States Michael Oren, speaking from Tel Aviv, where he had just emerged from a bomb shelter following a missile strike, offered his assessment that the gift was most likely related to allowing tankers to begin transiting the strait. Dozens of tankers have been held in place, unable to move through the waterway, their cargo representing enormous economic value to the global market. If Iran is signaling willingness to allow that traffic to resume as a gesture of good faith, that would represent a tangible and measurable concession, one whose value is directly legible in the oil price and whose significance would be immediately felt by economies around the world. But the question of who exactly the United States is negotiating with remains genuinely unclear and is a matter of significant analytical debate among those closest to the situation. Iran's parliament speaker, who has been publicly identified as a potential interlocutor, is a figure Ambassador Oren characterized as an old-time revolutionary, unlikely to make significant concessions. The foreign minister, Aragchi, has been mentioned in some reports as a potential contact, but Oren and others close to the Israeli intelligence picture suggest he lacks the authority to make binding commitments. The ambassador's assessment, based on Israeli sources, is that the people the president is actually engaging with are in the military and the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. If that assessment is accurate, it carries significant implications. The IRGC is the most powerful institution in Iran. the organization that commands the country's missile forces, its proxy networks, and its security apparatus. Negotiating with IRGC figures is negotiating with the people who actually control the instruments of power in Iran. It is also negotiating with an organization that is formally designated as a terrorist entity by the United States government. President Trump addressed the question of trust with characteristic directness, saying he does not trust the Iranians, but that the gift they delivered demonstrates they are dealing with the right people. He framed the logic as follows: the Iranian leadership that created the conditions for this conflict has been largely eliminated. Senior leaders are gone. Third-tier figures have been eliminated. The people now in a position to make decisions are different people from those who created the problem, and their act of delivering on a promised gift shows they have at least some capacity to follow through on commitments. General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst and former Army Vice Chief of Staff, expressed considerable skepticism about this framework. Keane noted that the regime has been, in his characterization, pathological liars and cheaters for 47 years, and that the intelligence evidence of Iranian behavior clearly demonstrated their ideological commitment to the path they have long pursued. He acknowledged that if there truly is a genuine change of heart on the Iranian side and a real willingness to surrender everything of strategic value, it would be a monumental concession, but expressed significant doubt that the current situation represents that kind of fundamental transformation. The skepticism expressed by General Keane and others reflects a deeper historical pattern that is essential context for evaluating the current moment. Iran's nuclear program has been the central challenge in American-Iranian relations for decades. Multiple administrations, Republican and Democratic, have attempted to constrain Iranian nuclear ambitions through a combination of sanctions, diplomacy, and covert action. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, negotiated under President Obama and signed in 2015, represented the most comprehensive attempt to address the nuclear question through diplomacy. That agreement placed temporary limits on Iranian enrichment activities in exchange for sanctions relief. Critics of the deal, including President Trump, argued that its sunset provisions meant the limits were not permanent, that the inspection regime was insufficiently rigorous, and that it failed to address Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for proxy forces throughout the region. Trump withdrew from the agreement in 2018. Iran subsequently expanded its enrichment activities, ultimately producing near-weapons-grade uranium enriched to 60%, and publicly boasting, as reported by envoy Steve Witkoff, that the country possesses enough highly enriched uranium to produce 11 nuclear weapons. Iranian President Pezeshkian had maintained publicly as recently as February of this year that Iran was not seeking nuclear weapons and was prepared for verification. Ambassador Oren and others note the deep tension between that public claim and the operational reality of Iran's nuclear program. The economic dimensions of this conflict have been felt immediately and acutely by American consumers and global markets alike. Oil prices measured by the West Texas Intermediate benchmark have ranged from roughly $88 to $100 per barrel since the conflict began, reflecting the market's real-time assessment of the probability that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed and the uncertainty about how the conflict will resolve. The national average price for a gallon of regular gasoline has reached $3.97 according to ETA, a full dollar higher than just 1 month ago. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has acknowledged the pain American consumers are experiencing while framing it as short-term disruption in service of a multi-decade problem. He and President Trump have both suggested that once the conflict resolves, energy prices will fall substantially, potentially below pre-conflict levels. Whether that prediction proves accurate depends entirely on the nature of the resolution achieved. Market analysts and institutional investors are watching the situation with an unusual combination of anxiety and cautious optimism. Kevin O'Leary, venture founder and Fox Business contributor, offered a perspective that captured the sentiment among some sophisticated market observers. The instability is real and painful, but the potential upside of a durable resolution that reintegrates the Gulf region into the global economic system is historically significant. O'Leary noted that the United Arab Emirates alone ranks third in the world in artificial intelligence development, behind only the United States and China, and that the regional economies affected by this conflict have enormous growth potential if a stable security environment can be established. He argued that what sophisticated money is evaluating is not just the current oil price, but the possibility of a new regional order in which capital can flow freely and the Gulf economies can pursue their development ambitions without the shadow of Iranian threat hanging over every calculation. Oil market expert Jackie DeAngelis reinforced the technical picture, noting that the drop from $99 per barrel to $88 per barrel on Sunday night alone reflects just how much speculative premium is built into the current price and how quickly that premium could deflate if credible signals of straight reopening emerge. The Wall Street Journal has reported that American allies in the Gulf are moving closer to potentially joining the conflict directly against Iran. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which have both been absorbing Iranian drone and missile strikes for weeks, are reportedly recalculating their posture. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has reportedly been urging President Trump in direct conversations to continue military operations until the hardline Iranian government is eliminated, seeing in the current moment what the New York Times described as a historic opportunity to remake the Middle East. That framing echoes the broader vision that American officials and regional partners have articulated for a transformed regional order, one that would include a normalization of Saudi-Israeli relations and the expansion of what the Trump administration calls the Abraham Accords framework. Former Israeli Ambassador Oren and retired Navy Captain Brent Sadler both noted that this vision of a reshaped Middle East was already gaining momentum before the October 7th attacks in 2023 interrupted the normalization trajectory. The current conflict, whatever the short-term costs, is being evaluated by some regional actors through the lens of whether it creates the conditions to finally realize that broader transformation. Multiple countries are engaged in mediation efforts to facilitate a negotiated end to the conflict. Egypt, Oman, Pakistan, and Turkey have all reportedly been in contact with both the American and Iranian sides. India's foreign minister has spoken directly with Secretary Rubio. India has deployed warships to escort its tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, a signal of both the economic stakes for New Delhi and the degree to which the conflict has drawn global actors into its orbit. NATO's Secretary General has indicated that allied nations are coming together to consider how to contribute to securing the strait. France has reportedly sent a carrier strike group to the region. The international pressure for a resolution is coming from every direction, from American allies in Europe concerned about energy supplies, from Asian economies dependent on Gulf oil, from Gulf Arab states absorbing Iranian attacks, and from the global shipping and insurance industries facing paralysis in one of the world's most critical maritime corridors. Several key military and strategic questions remain unresolved as the five-day pause plays out. Retired Rear Admiral Montgomery and other analysts have emphasized that the Strait of Hormuz question cannot be considered resolved simply by an Iranian statement of willingness to allow traffic. The mines, the drone capabilities, and the shore-based anti-ship missile systems that Iran has deployed to threaten transit through the strait must be comprehensively addressed before commercial shipping can safely resume at scale. Even if a ceasefire or agreement is reached, untangling the backlog of dozens of tankers and restoring insurance market confidence in the safety of strait transit could take weeks or months, according to multiple analysts. The operational military assessment from Rear Admiral Montgomery suggested that thoroughly addressing the maritime threat would require approximately 2 more weeks of focused military operations against Iran's maritime threat infrastructure, even in the most optimistic scenario. The question of what happens to the Iranian regime itself is one that American officials have handled with deliberate ambiguity. President Trump has explicitly denied that regime change is an objective of Operation Epic Fury. General Keane and others have noted that whatever emerges from negotiations, the regime in Tehran would likely remain in place formally, which raises the question of how any agreement can be durably enforced. At the same time, Trump made a remarkable observation Monday that the Iranian leadership structure has been so thoroughly disrupted by the conflict that what now exists is effectively a new group making decisions, people who were not in charge when the conflict began. Whether that new group has both the authority and the genuine willingness to make and keep commitments of the magnitude the American side is seeking remains the central unanswered question for the American military personnel serving across the region, and there are approximately 50,000 of them across multiple installations in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, and Iraq. The coming days will be watched with intense personal attention. These are the men and women whose safety is directly tied to the decisions being made in Washington, Tehran, Riyadh, and every capital where intermediaries are relaying messages between the two sides. The Marines arriving from Japan, the 82nd Airborne standing by on prepared to deploy orders, the sailors on the Abraham Lincoln launching sorties day and night. They are the human reality behind every abstract strategic calculation being made in this conflict. What should viewers watch for as this story develops? The 5-day deadline President Trump has set is the first and most immediate marker. If no credible progress toward a straight reopening emerges by that deadline, the administration has indicated it will resume consideration of strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure. The question of whether a direct face-to-face meeting between American negotiators and Iranian counterparts can be arranged, reportedly being pursued by Steve Witkoff in a location such as Pakistan, is the next critical milestone. Any concrete evidence that tanker traffic is actually being permitted to resume through the strait would be a measurable signal of Iranian seriousness. And the question of the Karg Island operation remains live. If negotiations falter, the military option of seizing that island, Iran's primary oil export terminal, would represent a fundamental escalation in the economic dimensions of the conflict. The broader historical significance of this moment is difficult to overstate. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been defined by antagonism since 1979. 47 years of hostility, of proxy conflicts, of assassination attempts, of nuclear brinkmanship, of American troops killed by Iranian-backed forces. If a genuinely durable resolution emerges from the current moment, one that addresses the nuclear program, the missile program, and the proxy network, it would represent one of the most consequential diplomatic achievements in the modern history of American foreign policy. The skepticism expressed by General Keane and others about Iranian reliability is grounded in decades of documented behavior and is not easily dismissed. But as President Trump noted, the people across the negotiating table today are not the same people who created the conditions that made this conflict inevitable. What they will do, whether they have the authority to make binding commitments, and whether those commitments will hold, is what the next 5 days will begin to reveal. The lights on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln are still on tonight. American jets are still launching strikes. Iranian drones are still falling on Gulf Arab cities. The tankers are still waiting at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, but something has changed. A gift has been given. A president says he is dealing with the right people. And for the first time in 4 weeks of sustained combat, there is at least the possibility that the conversation happening right now leads somewhere different from more of the same. Whether that possibility becomes reality is the story that will define this presidency, this region, and the global economic order for years to come. We will be watching every development as it unfolds and bringing it to you in real time. For Special Report, this has been your comprehensive briefing on Operation Epic Fury and the diplomatic breakthrough that may be reshaping the conflict. Stay with us.